Okay, thank you very much, Dave. So I'll hand it over to you after our lavish introduction, which points to fans wanting a recording. Um, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for talking to us about municipal democracy since the pandemic.
My pleasure. That email was actually from my mother. She always does that. It's just to make me sound impressive. Um, Thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you for the work that you're doing in Kingston. Municipal community organizing is often overlooked. From civics class through adult life and through the media, we are fed this idea that provincial politics and federal politics is the highest level, the most important level. And I'm sure all of you have learned, if you're doing municipal work, that most of the decisions that affect our daily life and our communities and our neighborhoods and the places we actually spend our time, it's all municipal. Municipal government is everything, in my opinion. And we're actually, I think we've seen a cultural shift politically over the last couple of decades, where before you would become a councillor and then a mayor and then an MP or an MPP, and then the goal was to go up. And frequently now we're seeing former MPs becoming mayors. We're like there's a shift the other way, or provincial federal party leaders becoming mayors. Of course, it goes both ways still. Very impressed with your AGM. You run a tight ship. That was great. So I have a few things I want to touch on. First of all, for those of you who were involved in the referendum in Kingston in 2018, you might remember me. I was helping to run the Yes campaign. I remember Vicky, of course, from those meetings, but lots of other of you might have been involved too. These were the door hangers we put on every door. It was called Yes Kingston, campaign for ranked ballots. For those of you who don't remember, it was actually quite historic at the time. Ontario had recently granted permission for any municipality in Ontario, and there's 444 municipalities. Any of them, for the first time in like 100 years, were allowed to use ranked ballots, which allows you for a mayoral election or any single winner election to at least get to a majority winner rather than a plurality winner. It's not as good as proportional elections, in my opinion, but for a single winner election, it's fantastic to switch to ranked ballot. These are some of the lawn signs we put up in Kingston. And it was such an amazing campaign. We had all of our meetings at Simon Barron and Amy Kaufman's house. And I was really impressed with the community there, the volunteers, the media, your mayor. We did some great events. We did a fundraising event in a church with Sarah Harmer, who lives nearby. Anyways, we won that referendum, one of the only democratic reform referendums in my lifetime in Canada that has actually succeeded in winning. So thank you, Kingston, for being so amazing. Of course, Doug Ford, 2 years later, banned ranked ballots, which is why you didn't use them in 2022. And I haven't looked at your data, but I'll bet lots of your counselors won their seats with only 30, 40% of the vote, which is particularly improper if it's an incumbent. So if you're an incumbent mayor or an incumbent counselor and you win your seat with 35, 40%, that means that most of your constituents didn't want you back. Well, that's just kind of weird, which is why, by the way, none of the parties use first past the post to elect their leaders. every party uses a ranked ballot to elect their own leaders, including Mr. Doug Ford himself. He was elected leader of the Conservative Party with a ranked ballot, but then he told Kingston that you're not allowed to use a ranked ballot. The other referendum that same day was, of course, in Cambridge, Ontario, and they also voted yes. But they also have not been allowed to switch. And what you might not know is that on the same day that Kingston and Cambridge held their referendums, the city of London, Ontario, actually switched to a ranked ballot. This is 2 years before Doug had said that they're not allowed to. So there's a great report that I'll just mention to you guys later in detail, because this will be coming back to Ontario. And Kingston is in one of the best positions to be a leader across the country of democratic reform by bringing ranked ballots to your city hall. And there's a lot of advantages to bringing ranked ballots, some of which relate to the data sets I'm going to talk about from the Municipal Democracy Index. And one simple example is the gender balance on a city council. None of our levels of government right now have anywhere close to 50% women. In Ottawa, I think we're stuck at around a third, so like the low 30s. And we, at best, I believe. And we rank, I think, something like 65th in the world when it comes to gender representation in our national parliament. And for the national parliament, the data is very clear. Proportional systems give so much more diversity and gender representation. At the municipal level in Ontario, it's a little more complicated. Without political parties, there aren't as many proportional systems you could look at. But a ranked ballot has been shown to make it more likely for women, not just to win, but to run in the first place. Because one of the advantages of a runoff system with the ranked ballot is that there's less negativity. If I'm running for mayor against Vicky and Gord and Annette and I don't know, Sharon, under the current system of first past the post, I have a incentive to go negative and to attack them all. Because my vote can only go up if Sharon's goes down or Annette's goes down. I have to like steal votes away. And with a ranked ballot, it's exact opposite. I want Sharon's supporters to put me second. I want Annette's supporters to put me second. And Bob's and Vicky's. I want everyone's supporters to like me enough to rank me second. So I can't just go negative. Hold on, I'm just going to keep my eye on the chat. Yes. And feel free to put stuff in the chat. Not too much. I'll lose my mind. So your council right now, I think, has 3 women out of 13. Does that sound right? Yeah. I mean, that's pretty crappy. And it matters. I really do believe it matters. I think having representation of different generations, so intergenerational age on a council is important. I think having different economic backgrounds on a council is important. People who ride the bus, people who are tenants, people who ride bicycles. I think gender balance is important. And I think ethnic background and nationality and first language and all that's very important as well. And the voting system really impacts those outcomes. Anyways, that was just a little rant and segue off the fact that Kingston did hold this historic referendum in 2018. I spent so much time there. I rode the VIA train back and forth from Toronto in 2017 and 2018. And you know what else was really cool about that campaign is I set a goal early on that we needed to have Greens, Liberals, New Democrats, and Conservatives on the team working together on a common cause. And you can't always do that. It's a nice idea, but it's hard to pull off. And within 2 or 3 meetings, people had brought new faces to the table, and we were successfully able to have a core organizing team for the entire year that did have blue, green, orange, and red. I think that's so important when it comes to democracy work and democratic reform and making the system better. It's not a left-wing issue. It's not a right-wing issue. It's just about fairness. It's about equity. It's about transparency. It's about accountability, level playing field, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I did want to mention quickly, as was pointed out earlier, I do have a book. It's called Tear Down, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up. You can get it at your local library or stores or online. But I also wanted to mention that it's being turned into a 6-episode television series. It's being adapted by TVO. And we took all these different parts of the book and we're telling those stories through these 30-minute episodes, and it'll be on TV Ontario in the summer. And the TV show is going to be called Unrigged. And we went to places like Halifax and Edmonton and New York and Chicago, but we also went all the way to Iceland and Ireland to film segments of the show. Those were both really fun. I was lucky enough to go on the Ireland part. And I'll mention this quickly because it relates back to some of the work you do and what Kingston did in 2018 with this referendum. I think people forget that referendums can be, if they're designed well and used for the right topics, can be a very valuable tool to give voices back to a community, rather than just electing representatives who make decisions on our behalf for 4 years. There's a lot of room for direct democracy in between elections or on election day. And I did some research into this, and I found that in Toronto, and I don't know what you would find if you looked into this for Kingston, but in Toronto, throughout the 1920s, 30s, 40s, there were referendums every year. They would constantly go to the people and say, we want to build a new subway. We want to build a bridge. We want to give the vote to women. We want to change the municipal term from 1 year to 2 years. And instead of assuming that they had the right to make that decision, they would go to the people, because we're the bosses. Like, we employ council. We hire them. Sometimes we eventually fire them, and we pay them, right? So there was a kind of respect a century ago that if there's a question that you could bring back to your employer, you do it rather than making an executive decision. So, but the number of referendums has gone down and down and down to the point where 2 years ago now, 2022, of the 404 municipalities, there were only 2 referendums in the province. Any council can put any referendum question they want on the ballot in any election. And it doesn't cost anything because they're already having an election, whether you're using online voting, paper ballots, touchscreen. So as you get involved with issues over the next 2 years, especially the next year, because a referendum question has to be decided a year before election day. But if something comes over the next year, let's say there's a big debate, should we build a casino? And I don't know if you have a casino yet, but that was a big debate in Toronto a few years back. Or should we pave over the lake and turn it into a big go-kart facility? Something that's controversial. You feel that the public would definitely vote a certain way, but maybe council's going a different way because of lobbyist pressure, or just because they don't agree. Or maybe you just think that it would be good for the residents to actually have the discussion. There's an educational component of going back to the people on a question, right? So when you leave things to councillors, it actually takes away the opportunity for ordinary residents to hear the pros and cons. Oh, should we have a casino? Should we pave the lake? Should we, whatever the big debates are in Kingston these days? It's a civics class. It's a free civics class to actually go to the people and ask them what they want to do. The other advantage of referendums is it gives people a sense of ownership. When people feel that council's doing whatever they want and I have no control, that's what makes people hate paying taxes and just want small government, because they feel like everything's being shoved down their throat. When, of course, government is the thing that gives us parks and roads and schools and police and libraries. We need good government. We need a well-funded government. And I think people would have much more respect for government and willingness to contribute financially to government if they felt that they had a little more ownership and decision-making power. So one way to do this, by the way, is called a participatory budget, which I'll talk about in a few more minutes. But it's a really cool program. I don't think you're doing this yet in Kingston at all. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been experimented with in Kitchener, Hamilton, Halifax, all across the US. And essentially you take a little piece of the capital budget, $1 million, $500,000, or you have a ward system, is that right? You have wards, so you say each ward's getting $50,000 or $100,000, and it's essentially up to the people who live there. What do you want to do with it? And you have a town hall, and Sharon says, I want a pickleball court. And Gord says, we need to fix the basketball court. And Annette says, we need a bike lane that goes around the basketball court. And someone says, we need new benches, whatever it is. And then city staff are there in the room, and they'll give feedback on the actual viability, whether it's possible to do something, either because of you can't do it for legal reasons or budget reasons, or it's provincial jurisdiction. And then everyone votes. And maybe everyone votes for Sharon's pickleball court, and then you guys get a pickleball court and everyone's happy, or you decide to split it and do a bit of basketball, bit of pickleball, and suddenly it changes the way people think about taxes and about government, what government does, how it works, how hard the decisions are. That for every dollar of capital budget and operating budget, you have to decide where it goes. And if you take it out of the, you want to put some in the basketball court, it's got to come from somewhere else, like a library or a sidewalk, unless you want to raise taxes a little bit. And that's always a trade-off. So there's a lot of education when it comes to direct democracy. Anyways, that was a tangent, off a tangent, off a tangent. The reason what I was trying to get to you on this point is, keep in mind that if an issue comes up that you think Kingston would benefit from an issue-based referendum, pitch it. All it takes is one councillor to move a motion saying, I, Councillor Schmolka, says, oh, wow, she's on there twice. Vic, there's two Vic, by the way, on this call. I, Councillor Schmolka, or Mayor Schmolka, whatever it may be, I move a motion that in the 2026 election, we include on the ballot a question as to whether we should rename the pickleball court Sharon Court. Or whatever it is. I honestly have no clue what the big issues are in Kingston, but don't forget how valuable this tool is. Culturally and politically, we've completely forgotten about referendums in Ontario. And I think it's a shame. And by the way, in the US, they still have this culture. Oh, that's really weird, Vicky. Vicky says she doesn't know who the other Vicky Schmolka is, but there are clearly two on my screen. In the US, as you know, they frequently they call them ballot questions. And they'll have big campaigns, vote yes on 5, vote no on 3. And I think it's really cool. And it can be divisive. There are reasons not referendums. What I say in the book is that the devil's in the details. A well-designed referendum on a good question that is ripe for community discussion can really be a positive experience with a positive outcome. A poorly designed referendum can just create polarization, anger, bad outcomes, misinformation, etc. Give me a second here. What was I going to say though? I don't know. I'm getting.
Dave,
Yeah.
One thing I think that's really on the minds of a lot of the people here and the groups here is the democratic processes that are in place now,
Yes.
in theory, but are not adhered to, such as
Yes.
Consulting standing committees, such as enabling ordinary people to give delegations,
Sure.
not having
So,
meetings behind closed doors. I wonder if you could speak
sure.
to some of that.
I can segue right into that very nicely. So the interesting point about referendums is that no one knows that it is a tool you can use, which is why it's hardly being used at all. And by the way, in the US, the best part of it is that citizens can trigger a referendum. You don't even need the council to support you. But to get back to what you were just saying, I kind of see City Hall as a chess game. And for those of you who have gotten heavily involved in an issue, you too have learned that there's a lot of moving pieces. They don't all move in straight lines. There's always someone else's hands on the pieces. Very often they know how to play the game better than you because they are professionally trained to do it, whether that is the city staff or whether that is lobbyists working on behalf of corporate interests. They know the rules of the game and they play them very well. They are master chess players. The trick to making sure that rules aren't being broken is, number one, knowing the rules. That is not easy. A lot of this stuff is buried in provincial legislation. I have a whole section in my book. There's a chapter called what's it called? Oh my God. I'm losing it.
I got name and contact for that guy, that
Neutrality.
Oh,
It's my leveling the field. Anyways, it's about tricks of the trade. I think that's it. And it's all these ways. Someone's audio is on. I think it's Liao.
He looks familiar. Like I've
Oh, this is great what Doug put in the chat.
Um,
Take a look at the chat, folks. You used to have some referendums back in the 30s and 50s. Interesting. Number one, knowing the rules. So for example, in-camera sessions or freedom of information requests or omnibus bills, et cetera, can easily be manipulated and abused if no one's paying attention and if no one knows what the actual rules are in the first place. Some of these rules go back to old provincial legislation in the Municipal Act, for example. Sometimes there's differences from municipality to municipality. If you're in a two-tier area, you might have a county rule that's different than your municipal rule. Also, municipal clerks have different interpretations of the rules. And sometimes they might not agree with your interpretation of the rule. For example, in our last election here, I don't live in Toronto anymore, by the way. I live in Grey Highlands, and I will send you in the chat a group I've started that you'll relate to. It's the Grey Highlands Municipal League. So wherever I go, I create new municipal projects. And the other interesting part to that is that when I lived in Toronto, Kingston seemed like a small town to me. But now that I live in a municipality of 10,000 people, you guys are like a metropolis. You're a city. I can't even say city anymore. We don't have city hall or city councilor. We just have a hall, councilors. So in our last election with this league, I wanted to mail information about the election to every candidate. Oh, I should grab this from my basement. You will love this. You can see it on the website. We ran a campaign to encourage more people to run for city council. And this was at a time when we had record low participation across the province. We had councils near you, north of you, completely acclaimed. Everyone acclaimed, no election at all. But here in Grey Highlands, we were able to get a record number of candidates. And we did that by advertising it as a job opening. Grey Highlands is hiring 7 people. Here's the salary. Here's the job description. Here are the skills required. And we got all these people who were like, oh, this actually sounds really cool. And then we mailed out a full color menu, like a restaurant menu or a Home Depot catalog of all the people running for office. So people were informed about the election. But we asked the clerk if we could get the names and addresses of people who were voters in Grey Highlands but didn't live here, because we have a lot of cottage owners here. And she said, well, you can look at the, what's it called? The roll book, the tax roll book. All their names are in there. All their addresses are in there. They're Toronto addresses. And you can write them down one by one. But I won't give you the list. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. And she was basing this on her interpretation of a rule that had been made up in the Provincial Act before we had digital records. And essentially her interpretation was that it did allow people to look at the book, but it didn't allow her to share a digital version of the book. So she was expecting me to sit there for days. I don't think she would even let me take a photo of it, because this legislation was probably written before cameras were invented. So, but I was allowed to sit there and write. So sometimes the biggest problem is interpretation of rules. And sometimes in those cases, you need to get a lawyer on your side and a counselor on your side and push back a little. And keep in mind, the clerk doesn't have the final say on these issues. Counsel can often override the clerk. The clerk is there to give professional advice. And of course, the clerk does have final say on a whole bunch of things, but counsel can override the clerk. Anyway, so the sections I have about, it's called Tricks of the Trade. And the drawing in there is someone with 3 coconuts, and they're moving them around, and there's people underneath who are just trying to get to their council meeting. At least one person on your team for each issue has to really dive in and become like a real geek on the issue and read through the legislation, and then sometimes find a lawyer to get an opinion on the legislation. Because the only way a council could have an in-camera session that's clearly against the rules is if the people watching either don't know the rules or aren't prepared to fight back. And this is something I think the media would pay attention to. It's not usually because people are intentionally trying to break rules. Honestly, I mean, that's my message. I think it's almost always because this is the way they used to do it, or no one told us otherwise. Keep in mind too, it's the clerk's job to propose the most risk-averse path for anything. So if someone proposes, if you apply for a freedom of information request and the clerk can think of any reason why maybe it shouldn't be granted, they'll say no. But you can always come back and you can always push. And very often I've been able to do that with allies on council or allies in the media. You get one friendly journalist writing an op-ed or an editorial about council doing things in secret, and like that should change things pretty quick. Politicians do not want to be seen as breaking rules. They do not want to be seen as being secretive, non-transparent, non-responsive, etc. So it, just like chess, the way you learn how to play well at chess is to actually not just play a lot, but learn the different moves, learn the sequences of moves, and then learn how to figure out and anticipate what the other person's moves are. City Hall is crawling with experts who are masters at playing chess. Again, especially not the counselors, to be honest. The counselors come and go. That's not their skill set. Some of them might, but it's most counselors are not the people who actually understand how the system works. And in some ways, it's not their job. That's their job, is to understand as much as they need to move their agenda forward and make informed choices when the clerk says it's time to vote. The two groups in that building who really get the rules are the municipal staff, who are kind of on your side, but also, again, their job is to be risk averse. And your job is to be innovative and constructive with new ideas. Let's try something new. Let's do this. City staff will always say, oh, I don't know. That's our legal department says that, you know, participatory budgets could open us up for lawsuits, blah, blah, blah. Let's go in camera to talk about those lawsuits. So municipal staff can be your friends, but it's also, keep in mind that they have a built-in desire to avoid anything new or creative often, not as individuals, but as a system. It perpetuates inertia. But the other group at City Hall who really do know the rules is the lobbyists, and they are often have an opposite agenda of ordinary people. Not to paint all lobbyists as bad people or all the groups who hire lobbyists. I've done lobbying. I've been a registered lobbyist, but for the most part, the reason companies hire lobbyists is because they're proposing something that wouldn't be popular otherwise. If you're a company that wanted to like hand out flowers to everyone, you wouldn't have to hire lobbyists to do that. So as soon as a company is spending, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands on lobbying, chances are it's because they're doing something that the public wouldn't actually want. Those lobbyists know how to use all the tools that you were just talking about. They might even suggest to a counselor, let's do this one in camera, right? Or let's slide this one into an omnibus bill or whatever. So learning the tricks of the trade is the way to manipulate them, expose them, and stop them. There's more stuff in the chat, by the way, about, there was a casino referendum. A 2014 referendum in Kingston rejected the casino plan. Okay, Vicky asked about the lobbyist registry. What a great segue into the Municipal Democracy Index. Can everyone see this? Although I can't see you now. Can someone unmute and say verbally yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Woo! This is the Municipal Democracy Index. It's a project I did a few years ago, and I just thought it would be great to gather data and illustrate it, to compare municipalities against each other and kind of create this ranking system. And part of my inspiration was how the Canadian Automobile Association puts out this annual list of the worst roads. And it's not very scientific, but the media always covers it. No one wants to have the worst road like in their town. So it becomes this motivating factor. And if Kingston has one of the worst roads, you know, council will suddenly bend over backwards to like fix up the roads because it looks bad. So I wanted to use shame and guilt in the same way to expose which cities were doing a really crappy job when it comes to democracy. Where are the potholes? So similar to the CAA project, this isn't really scientific. It's a methodology that I created that makes sense to me, but it's scientific in the sense that it's empirical. I'm using real data. You can download this report, by the way. Just Google Ontario Municipal Democracy Index. You'll find it on the Unlock Democracy page. This is my charity I run. And you'll also find it on the Armstrong page. Okay, so I looked at different things. This was the main ranking here. Peterborough came out top, by the way. And Kingston was kind of, as was mentioned, in the lower third, number 20. And this was done for the 32 largest municipalities in Ontario. And here's Kingston, not at the bottom, but not at the top. And we can look through some of the various metrics that I looked at. So this one's actually not too bad for Kingston. This was the voter turnout. This is in 2018, by the way. So this is old now. I haven't updated the data for 2022. But Kingston here is right around here, number 6. Not bad at all. Although let's all agree here that this is pretty sad that the upper threshold for the best turnout was just over 50%. The lowest being closer to 25. So you guys did pretty good, but only because you were in the low 40s compared to a bunch of other towns that did much, much worse. But that wasn't your worst showing there. Gender balance on council. I think you've dropped since then. You were at 75% male, and I think now you're actually closer to 77% male on council. So that didn't help you. You're in the lowest, one of the lowest categories there. And the goal here is to be 50-50, not to be an all-woman council, although I would take an all-woman council personally. And then here too, this is a graphic where the goal is to be on this 1. The 1 being a 1-to-1 ratio of percent of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in your population compared to your council. And here you guys were pretty good, actually, pretty in the middle. Now this is where it gets fun and goes back to Vicky's question. I came up with my own way of measuring what's called user experience design. Now, UX design is a term that's used in different sectors and industry. I have a whole chapter on it in the book, chapter 1, the mechanics of exclusion. And user experience design is just as it sounds. When you're designing any system or object or place, are you taking into account not just what it's supposed to do, but how it's going to feel for someone who's using it, especially for the first time? Will they understand it? Will it be comfortable? Is it easy to use? Is it familiar? Or is it alienating and complicated and uncomfortable? And that can range anything. It could be a pen, right? A pen can have a really good UX design in terms of how it feels, how it holds this piece of rubber, how the ball rolls, how it comes out of the box. Are there any sharp edges? The way I apply it to democracy is if Shirley Bailey or Bob McInnes or John Grenville for the first time say, I'm going to go down to a meeting. I'm going to have my voice heard. I'm going to go to the next budget meeting or the planning committee or the transportation committee. That could have 2 distinct outcomes. One could be they sit down and they're like, wow, why have I never done this before? I'm learning so much. I'm learning how the system works. I'm able to chat with the counselors during the break. I understand the agenda. There's some snacks over there. I might stick around for the afternoon. There's actually good Wi-Fi. These seats are comfortable. There's an outlet. I might come here for every meeting and do some work on the side. And if an issue comes up I want to speak to, I can speak to it, etc. Or it could be a situation where they can't even find the right room. There's no signage in the building. When they get to the room, the door's closed and they're not even sure if they're allowed in. when they go in, no one's explaining the agenda. It's all in administrative, bureaucratic jargon and acronyms, and they don't understand what's being debated. They don't understand the rules. There's motions and amendments and friendly amendments, and things are being what are all the words? I've stopped going to city halls because I burned out. But there's all this insider, baseball that, again, if you're a counselor, it all sounds normal to you. If you're a city staffer, it's normal to you. If you're a lobbyist, it's normal to you. But if you're walking in there for the first time and you feel confused, alienated, uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, for example, not only do most city councils not offer snacks, most council chambers don't let you eat in the chamber, which is just mind-blowing to me. There's hardly any public spaces anywhere where you're not allowed to feed yourself with food that you brought. You all probably know that very few agenda items on a council agenda have a specific time, like 2:05. So if you want to go see a movie at a theater, it'll play at a time and you go at the time. If you want to catch a vote or a debate about, cuts to your bus funding, you might have to wait there for hours and hours. So you put on top of that you're not allowed to eat, or in Toronto's case, I don't know about Kingston, Toronto says you can't eat or drink. Like, how is that even legal to invite hundreds of people into a room and say you can't drink water? This is like basic user experience design. So what I did with the index is I came up with a bunch of ways of looking at to what degree has the administration and council tried to make the building and the processes user-friendly. And I gave points for each one. So one is Civics 101. Does the city offer, and this is something you should fight for, does the municipality offer a free course for adults about how City Hall works? Explaining the organizational structure, explaining how motions become law, explaining operating budgets, capital budgets, budget cycles, freedom of information requests, et cetera, et cetera. There are cities that offer this, and I think it's a basic necessity that any city hall that isn't offering free workshops on how City Hall works is not doing their job. And you can see for each of these areas, I did show examples of who's doing it right. So Pickering got the highest points for their Pickering 101 program, which is amazing. Okay, here's participatory budgets, which I mentioned earlier. And here was mentioned the lobbyist registry, which Vicky asked about. So lobbyist registries, I think, are a really valuable tool. The devil is, again, in the details. I'm seeing a note in the chat about people having trouble registering online to make a delegation. So first of all, you shouldn't even have to register, in my opinion. Anyone who's at the meeting should be able to put up their hand and say, I want to speak. If you have to register, the system should be as easy as possible. But why should a citizen have to register in advance to speak at a meeting? So lobbyist registries, just there's different ways to do it. There aren't many municipalities that have it, but it's expanding. So in Toronto, there's two important data sets related to lobbying. And it's really fun to actually cross-reference them. So one is every meeting that a lobbyist has with a councillor is recorded. And there is a public registry. Oh my goodness, surely that's crazy. So the value of that is that it just creates a bit of transparency of who's talking to who. Now, they don't say what they talked about at the meeting necessarily. The topic is supposed to be there, but you don't know any other details. And then, of course, we have election contribution disclosure. And what has been really startling to me is when you cross-reference those, it boggles my mind that we openly allow people to lobby a councillor while they're also openly donating money to that councillor's election campaign. And that doesn't set off an automatic red flag. They don't have to recuse themselves. They don't have to declare a conflict. But literally, someone who's being paid to lobby them, registered to lobby them, lobbies them, can also be giving them money. So that's problematic, I think, to me. Let's see which cities have that right now, Vicky, because the best way to advocate for any reform is to show that it's being done somewhere else, right? So if you want to do Civics 101, your best asset is to go to Pickering, take the course, get the materials, and then go to your counselors and say, hey, you got to see what they're doing in Pickering. And Vicky, if you want to see a lobbyist registry, then what you could do is go to my data set at the end. I've got Kingston here highlighted. Oh, am I sharing my screen? Sorry. Here we go. Lobbyist registry. Okay, Brampton has one. Burlington kind of has one. Hamilton has one. Ottawa got 10 points. So did Toronto and Vaughan. And here you'd have to go to my methodology. So if it's a voluntary program, they got 2 points. If it's names only, no date and time, they got 4 points. And if they have a comprehensive and mandatory program for a lobbyist registry, they got 10 points. So again, back to my handy dandy chart, and I don't think this has changed much since 2018. The only 10s you've got here are Ottawa, Toronto, Vaughan. There you go, Ottawa, Toronto, and Vaughan. So I guess for you guys, yeah, I don't know. Those all sound like about 2 hours away. Well, no, maybe Ottawa's the closest, but go and like talk to the staff there. They might have a booklet about it. Say I need 20 copies of the booklet, and then do a deputation or delegation at your council and get all these groups to like endorse. Make sure you're not just being reactive, right? It's very easy to spend all your time putting out fires. Council does something stupid, you fight back. They have a secret meeting, you complain. Make it proactive. Figure out what rules need to be in place to prevent bad behavior. And then you come forward, and you're not there to complain. You're there to say, I'm here on behalf of the coalition of Kingston community groups, and 15 organizations have come together to say that we would like to see a staff report exploring the viability of a lobbyist registry, as we've already seen working well in Ottawa, Vaughan, and Toronto. And suddenly you're not there as a, activist group fighting council. You're actually there as the voice of reason, constructive voice of innovation. And there might be some people on staff who actually think it's really cool. And again, get the media on board, because it doesn't look good if there's a vote on council, should we have a lobbyist registry, and they vote against it, right? And get people in the room. And again, it's hard if they have to wait all day for an untimed item and they're not allowed to eat. And I don't know what other rules you might have there. But if there's a vote about a lobbyist registry and you get 60, 70 people in the room sitting and watching, and the councilors know the media is watching, wow, you've just changed the history of Kingston. You've got a lobbyist registry now. Let me carry on with the list, because that's just one reform. And by the way, the lobbyist registry is just one tool. It only works if someone's actually reading it and keeping track of it, and speaking out if they see things that seem improper. This is great. Election campaign finance subsidy. I can't stress how important this is. And let me see how you guys rank. So for this, I do percentage of rebate divided by 10. Interesting. And Kingston got 0. So let me explain why this is important. It costs money to run for city council. Maybe some people want to drop some numbers in the chat. What is the average cost of a council campaign in Kingston? Anyone? 2,000 to 3,000? Really? That's it? Wow. How small are you riding? How small are your wards? What's your population per ward? Anyone? No one knows? Population of a ward? Just divide your city population. Ah, mine is debatable. Okay. Vicky, $20,000, or is it 20,000 people? Are you debating the number, or I need
No, I'd
dollars
say
on it?
people, but the problem is the students that we never know how to calculate. So we had a court case saying students are to be considered as part of a constituency for a district because they were trying to get rid of the district around Queen's University. However, when
Interesting.
you're trying to figure out, the students don't usually vote.
Right,
So are they in or are they out?
right.
I could look
Anyways,
it up.
maybe the campaign finance thing isn't as big an issue for you then. In Toronto, just a counselor campaign can easily cost $40,000. And that was before they merged the wards. So it really became an issue of like, who's got the corporate connections, who's essentially being funded by lobbyists. But if you guys are running for council for $2,000 or $3,000, I wouldn't worry about that one. You should be able to raise that from a big room full of friends. Voting system, nothing can happen there right now. Voting options, I think it's really important that councils provide different ways to vote online, maybe by phone, in person. Some cities actually have a mobile vote bus that just drives around and you can vote kind of like an ice cream truck. And then I did other things. This one is about hospitality in the chamber. I really think this makes a difference. And let me just pause here for a second. Look at this, allowing water, allowing drinks, serving water, serving drinks. The fact that I even have to put this on a chart just blows my mind. The fact that it wouldn't be common courtesy to serve beverages and snacks at any town hall, public meeting, committee meeting, councilor meeting, etc. But this is important because it goes back to a question that came up right at the beginning, right before my introduction, about the trade-off between virtual meetings like we're having now versus in-person meetings. And this ties to the title of actually what I was supposed to be talking about, municipal democracy since the pandemic. If there's been one change since the pandemic that still lingers and has really changed the feeling of community organizing, it's that we use Zoom a lot now. Both we do as citizens, and I don't know what your councils have done now, if they're still doing hybrid meetings or if they've switched completely back to in-person, but we were all doing exclusively Zoom for what, a year and a half. And then slowly community groups and councils are either shifting to hybrid, shifting back, or saying, hey, you know what, this is actually working fine. Let's all stay on Zoom. And I guess what I want to say is it's a real double-edged sword. The benefits to the community of being able to host events on Zoom, I think, are enormous. You don't have to ask people to come out of their homes on a cold winter night and leave their family and come to a meeting. You don't have to book a venue. You don't have to set up the whole space. You can just get, like we have here, 32 people spending 2 hours together. Half of you are probably wearing pajamas on the bottom. For those of you who your videos are off, you might be in the bath. You might be in bed in a hot tub. I mean, that's amazing. And there's advantages too for council meetings to be held, live stream, etc. But let me say this. There is something magical that can happen when people are actually in a physical room, making eye contact, reading each other's body language, smiling, building trust, sharing ideas, getting to know each other, that can't be replicated on Zoom. So for the community group side, I would say it's really, really important to make sure you're having face-to-face meetings, especially for small working groups, especially if you're launching a new project and it's 4 or 5 people who don't really know each other that well yet. They need to be sipping coffee and having a slice of pizza and either meeting in someone's living room or in a cafe. It's such an important part of the social bonding. that is the glue that keeps groups like yours together. But the other part is that at city council too, you can watch meetings on Zoom and you can give feedback through surveys and you can vote on, some kind of budget tool, whatever. There's lots of ways to participate digitally, and increasingly governments are trying to up their game of like civic engagement 2.0 and, open gov this, and, that's all fine. But at the end of the day, the decisions are made in rooms, and the lobbyists put on their suits and they put on their shoes and they go to City Hall and they are in the room. And if there's an issue coming up where it really is lobbyists versus community need, you be in the room, and you better be talking to counselors and shaking hands and schmoozing and sticking around during lunch and asking the counselors how their kids are. Lobbying is like, it's this whole big thing, and it's about building trust and social connections with key staff. Someone asked earlier if lobbyists lobby staff. Yes and no. I mean, not officially, of course. There'd be no lobbyist registry for that. But I mean, it's staff's job to do due diligence and research all aspects of a topic. So if I'm trying to write a report on whether we should have a casino or not, well, yeah, of course I'm going to talk to the casino proponents and advocates and ask them some questions about what they're proposing and why, and they'll give me answers. I don't know if that's lobbying or not, but relationships are built in those moments. And so I just can't stress this enough. In-person, face-to-face meetings, as much as you can, while also utilizing events like this to maximize participation of a group of people who already know each other and are essentially gathering for an administrative AGM, and also listening to a guy who lives 4 hours away. Okay, I'm just going to say a few other things really quickly, and then I'll open it to Q&A. I've been speaking for almost an hour. Sorry, I get really excited about this stuff. Okay. I want to put another link in the chat, tango.to. Is it .to? I'm just going to double check that myself. Tango.to. Check that out. So that's a map I made for Toronto. It's the Toronto Atlas of Neighborhood Groups and Organizations. I don't know if you've done this yet for Kingston, but if you haven't, I would take that. You have a web page that shows all of your partner groups. It's really fun to map them out, and it's really helpful for people who want to know, oh, I want to get involved with my community. Who's my local group, right? And they might live like near the boundary of two of them and say, oh, I actually live on this boundary, but my kids go to school in that other one, so I'm gonna get involved with that one. So mapping them out is really fun and very helpful. Working as a unified voice is very helpful. The fact that you have a coalition at all is amazing. You'd be surprised how many cities don't have any version of your coalition, including Toronto. Toronto's got a bit of a hodgepodge of pre-amalgamation networks in the downtown area, and then there's a North Toronto kind of group, but it's really, for a city of that size and that scale, it's really sad that there isn't a unified citywide coalition like the one you have here. I did a bunch of research for my book into how neighborhood groups can be strong, how they can sustain themselves financially. For example, you were saying before in the introduction that you don't have any funding. You should have funding. The work you do is so important. As neighborhood groups, you should have funding to send out printed newsletters. Because again, as nice as digital email, MailChimp, social media is, there's nothing like getting a really nice printed, well-designed newsletter from your neighbors at your door. And in fact, if you talk to people about how they first got involved in their community, very often it's because they saw a poster, saw a leaflet, saw a flyer, saw an ad in the paper, not because they somehow, like, emails don't fall onto your lap. You have to subscribe for an email. But putting things in someone's door is a great way to say, hey, this group is here. So I looked at cities that have really well-structured networks of community organizations that are given secure and stable funding by the municipality. There's a chapter on this in my book. I encourage you to read it. You can get it as an ebook, by the way, or an audiobook, or just get it from your library. But I'll tell you the ones that stood out for me. Edmonton. Edmonton has something called the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues. Every part of town has a community league. Every community league has their own hall that they own, and they all have staff, and it's funded through gambling partially, which is what we do is we run gambling money through Trillium, and then we give it to foundations. In other provinces, nonprofits just get money directly from casinos, but they also get money, I believe, from the municipality. And then they have the central group, like the EFCL, the federation has its own office with staff. And what you start to get is you can offer workshops on things like in-camera sessions and freedom of information requests, etc. You can train people. You can take an idea from one neighborhood, they did a really successful program, and teach it to all of the other neighborhoods. So EFCL, check that out. And then another really interesting one was Los Angeles, where they have 91 elected neighborhood councils that all get direct municipal funding from City Hall. Unbelievable. And an office called, it used to be called the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. Imagine a city-funded office in Kingston called the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I mean, this is unheard of stuff, but it's real. They changed it to, I forget, something, it was shorter, like Strong LA or Neighborhood LA. Anyways, there's, it's really important to have groups like yours at the hyper local level. It's really important to have networks like the coalition. It's really important to not just be reacting when bad things happen, but look for best practices in other municipalities, especially in Ontario, and then propose those with a concrete plan and get people to support them, get one councillor to move the motion, and then make sure the local media is watching. Make sure you're building up your own MailChimp email lists. I think email is still the most powerful tool. So all of your local groups should be using some type of MailChimp. Social media is great, but at the end of the day, email is still the most reliable people. And as we know, and someone mentioned in the chat, local journalism is fading. And all that's going to be left is actually groups like yours, who are the only ones paying attention. You'll become the journalists. You'll become the ones who people rely on about what's coming up at City Hall and how people can participate. And then lastly, at the end of the day, don't forget that every city councilor wants to get reelected. And they know that lobbyists don't elect them. People do. So when you fill that room with observers, when you get an article in the paper, when they know that they're being watched, you have enormous power, more power than any lobbyist will ever have. The greatest strength in municipal policymaking is educating the public and then mobilizing the public into a constructive army of observers who make sure that council's moving in the right direction. I'll end it there, and happy to take questions. And thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for all the great work you do.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, you touched on some applause here in various forms from everybody. You've raised a lot of issues, and it's part inspiration, part diagnosis. And there's been a lot of questions and comments in the chat. So I don't know whether we should just, people might want to revisit some of the things they typed in there. I think that would be fine, or pursue them further. I'll try and keep. Annette has raised her hand, so I'll try to look at people's screen, but if you can use the raise hand function, it's much easier to tell whether someone wants to speak. So Annette, do you want to go ahead?
I'm just following your guide, your lead there. So I did raise a point in the chat earlier on about consultation and public consultation coming in various guises, some of them not so genuine, I guess, would be my experience in Kingston. So we have something called Get Involved Kingston. You see great big billboards around town, and you're invited to go and make your opinion known on a website. We never see what the final tallies of those consultations are. Some other types of consultations include kind of drop-ins. Town hall seems to be a thing now, and your talk inspired me to make sense of what's going on. And I think that the staff has come up with a great idea to give every district a budget to run a town hall, to appear again, to be consulting publicly. And sometimes they're, like there's 30 people at them for a whole district. And then they go ahead and said, the report is, we had a great town hall and we learned a lot about what you feel is important with bike lanes. And we've now got this strategy. So we're going with model A. And you're like, what the heck? Like, how did you get from, we don't even know how many of those 30 people voted for model A. But so I'm a little jaded, let's say, about city-led public consultations. I actually prefer the roots up, ground up approach, but I'd like to hear your opinion about that. The other thing is, I think there's a switch and bait going on where I think they've done this, given councillors some money to, go put the pickle court in and get all the acclaim for putting pickle courts in. And meanwhile, people are fighting over where the pickle court's going and how many they're going to be, and is it going to be too noisy and blah, blah, blah. While, towers are dominating our skyline, the official plan is ignored, affordable housing is something said and not supported in any meaningful way. Anyway, that's my concern about that.
Yeah, it's there's no doubt examples where a consultation is happening after a decision has already been made, or it's just, it's being done just to look good. On the other hand, they are a great opportunity. I mean, I guess the question I would say is, why are only 30 people showing up?
A lot of people have lost trust in the city here.
Yeah, but I mean, that has to go both ways, right? So if people aren't showing up, then they're not showing up. But it could be because the municipality, they often do a really lousy job promoting events. So they'll have a town hall, but if you haven't promoted it well, and it's not enough to just put up a billboard saying get involved. If it's in an area, do they hand out flyers door to door, or do they have an email list of all the people? Was it at a convenient time? Are these meetings fun? Is there food? I'll ask again, is there food? Annette, if I invited you to my house next week and you came over and I didn't offer you a drink and there was no food, you would never come back. Like, Dave sucks. His house sucks. He doesn't know how to be a host. So it goes back to user experience design. But the other interesting thing here is that, and you all know this, I would imagine, that municipal level is very different in the sense that no one's really whipping votes. Like, a decision is never really done until the final vote. And for those of you who know how Queen's Parks works or the House of Commons, it's the exact opposite. Like, I could get elected to be an MP and I actually have no say on anything. You can lobby me, I can host a town hall, like, none of it matters, because I'm going to get what's called a bill kit from my house leader. And it's going to say on bill C-22, we're voting no. And that's it. And what's really beautiful about municipal councils in Ontario in particular, because other places like Vancouver has parties at City Hall, Montreal has parties in City Hall. A lot of the US has parties at City Hall where you get elected as a Democrat or a Republican in City Hall. But if Joan Jardin is a councillor, like, right up until the last second, she might be like, I don't know, I've heard some really good opinions on both sides. And there was that town hall last week, and then Bob McInnes called me up, and then I bumped into Shirley at the grocery, and I don't know, I'm gonna check with Vicky and Michael and Mary one last time. I know counselors who really flip-flop to the last second. Now in Toronto, there are like typical right-wing and left-wing groups who do tend to vote as a bit of a block, but you've got this huge mushy middle. I've had counselors like Josh Matlow in Toronto come up to me, like I'll be watching a council meeting in the room and he'll be like, I don't know what to do. What do you think? So don't underestimate how powerful it can be to have 30 people at that town hall meeting. Yeah. So I don't know if that was helpful or not.
Sharon has her hand up.
Me? I would like to say that I agree with you in terms of the fact that democracy has to be rediscovered. I think that people do not understand the meaning of democracy. I don't think they understand how it developed. I think that in part, this might have to go back to their high school teaching. I'm going to suggest to you that when I was going to KCVI, Ms. Hale was our civics instructor, and she and Mr. Ritchie were my favorite teachers. And the thing is that they laid everything out clearly. I also want to say that I kind of understood democracy to be like a house, a structure. And it was Jean Chrétien who kind of flummoxed me when he likened democracy to, or government, to a hockey game. And I was thinking about that this morning when I was listening to the CBC about a current event. But the thing is that if things are not straightforward, of course you're going to lose trust. If you don't know what the rules are, then of course you don't know what you're standing on. And I totally think that you made a wonderful suggestion about visiting other constituencies to find out about how democratic things work. But I also think that we need to go back a bit further. I think that in a sense on Cogeco, for example, we could interview various people who were historians or who are philosophers or who are involved in physics, and have them understand, explain to us the meanings of certain ideas and how they developed. And then to have a discussion on Zoom, like a place like this. I think that in a way, following this presentation, at another point in time, people should bring together all of their ideas about what is going on, why things are missing, why it turns out to be just sort of a jive party, and when things don't go a certain way, why policy is changed. And I think that there should be, dissatisfaction with people who talk out of both sides of their mouth, who say one thing and who mean something absolutely the opposite. But anyway, thank you very much for this. It's been wonderful to listen to, but I do think that the party aspect of it needs to be brought back to an older concept of being straightforward.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I just put 2 links in the chat. One is for an article I wrote in an Alberta magazine. It's called Teaching About Power, How Civics Classes Could Be Made Exciting. Okay. That's just above Joan's comment there about lobbying. And that's, there are way better ways to teach civics. One of the episodes coming out this summer on TV Ontario is all about how our civics education right now is completely failing our younger generations and ways we could be doing it much better. But I also put a link in there for a group called Synapsity. They're based in Ottawa, and they're worth checking out. They actually do kind of what I was talking about earlier. They're a community-based group that offers public education workshops on how municipal government works to help build stronger communities. And they'd be very happy to share their resources with you and explain to you what they do, and maybe even come to Kingston and lead a workshop. They're just down the road, Synapsity. Very cool group.
May I just say 2 more things?
Yeah.
Actually, maybe we should let Kathleen
I'm sorry. Okay.
got her hand up. Maybe we should move on. Thanks, though.
Okay.
Kathleen? You have to unmute yourself. You're still muted. We can't hear you.
Okay.
There you are.
Yeah, I was wondering if, sorry about that. I was wondering if most cities just give the, distribute the agenda for the Tuesday council meeting on the Thursday before, because we are just having a terrible time keeping up with the issues, and so often we're outwitted. I mean, for example, and city staff go to the councillors, and I said in the chat, a lot of them are new, and I think they're insecure, and they really depend on city staff. So, for example, there was a lot, city-owned lot of trees, and city staff convinced the councillors that it was greener to cut down all the trees for a gravel dump, because otherwise they would have to go somewhere out of town. So they all voted to cut down all these trees. It was ridiculous. And the only reason we won at city council in terms of the tannery that we were discussing earlier is because we spent a year on that. But in most cases, we have 4 days max.
Did the
is
tree?
that common?
Did the yeah? Sadly, it is. Did the tree item go to a committee first or just straight to council?
I don't think it did. I think it was just a. I don't think so.
So
there are
usually,
fewer and fewer committees.
So there's two sides to this. One is you could advocate to get it changed, and the way you would do that is, again, look at all the municipalities around you, and if you could find one that has, let's say, the agenda comes out 2 weeks before, you could use that as your precedent and say, why aren't we doing it like Bowmanville? But you do need an example. It's much harder to create something new or to push for something new than to say we should be doing it like X. But the second thing is, there are people inside City Hall, including most of council, I would think, who know what's coming up on an agenda before it's on the agenda. And that's part of the culture of lobbying. Lobbying isn't just sitting down and saying vote yes or vote no. You're working with the councillor throughout the whole process, and they're feeding you information before it actually gets out. So the agenda it might come out on a Thursday for a Tuesday, but someone's working on it, someone's preparing it, someone's drafting it. And it's not just staff, because they have to work with at least the mayor, but probably committee chairs as well. And then I'm surprised if it didn't go to a committee first. And if it had gone to a committee, then you would have been able to see that if it went to the committee on this date, it'll likely be on the next council meeting, and you can anticipate it. If it hadn't gone to committee, then the goal of that meeting for you as an advocate isn't to defeat it, it's to send it to committee. A great way to kill something is to delay it. Defer and refer are your two best friends if you don't have the votes to beat something. Lobbyists will do this all the time. You can defer indefinitely, you can defer for a month, or you can refer this motion to any standing committee. And it should be easier to win a vote like that. So if you have an ally on council, all you have to do is put forward a motion saying, there's a controversial topic, we haven't had a lot of time to see this. It talks about removing trees. I don't have enough information. I move that we refer this to committee, or I move deferral. And you can usually win those, and that gives you time. No?
We did have Lisa Osanek tried to put up a bit of a fight, but she's often outvoted. She's often alone in a 12-person council, so
Sad.
it's pretty sad. But thank you.
I mean, I don't know Kingston that well, obviously, but I would be surprised if the item appeared out of the blue on a Thursday to a Tuesday without anything prior, because usually there's a request for a staff report, and then a staff report comes back, it'll go to a committee. Things usually drag on a bit. You should be able to anticipate under normal circumstances when it's going to show up. And if not, then someone's playing games, and that's not good.
Oh, I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Shirley Bailey's pointed out that standing committees are not being used, and so you have staff reports going straight to council.
Wow. That's not normal. That's just not the way it's supposed to be.
And one of the problems with process, I think, is that process is hard for people to get their heads around.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people know what they want to happen, but the idea that there are certain tracks that you need to be on to achieve those goals, and they might even make it harder to achieve those goals. If you think that you've got this wonderful plan in mind, why bother with all the niceties of standing committees and proper processes? I think and you just look like you're a kind of anal stickler for precedent when it's really crucial for proper democratic governance.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sharon?
Well, the thing too is the fact, like, just on the same topic, I was at council some time ago, like a couple of years ago, and they had just handed out an hour or two before of something like 154 pages pertaining to something which I don't remember, and they were supposed to vote on it. And the thing is that this is not democracy. And I don't know, like, I honestly think too, I'm just going to go through these randomly. They're not in sequence, but Mayor Patterson has a private meeting with each councillor before the first council comes into play. I don't think that that's right, because the thing is, nobody knows what goes on. Now, Vicky might know what that has, like what he might say, but it might be sort of indiscreet to share it. But the point is, it shouldn't happen. I think that probably, the thing is that in a funny kind of way, I think that in the beginning, the city council was, in a sense, to be an imitation of what goes on in the territories. People are elected individually. They come forward with their own ideas. They're not associated with the taint of partyism. And so consequently, what you're looking at, or what you should be looking at, are people who are relying upon their own intelligence, their own knowledge, and their own integrity when something comes to a vote. And that's what's missing here. And another thing I'm going to say too, and it kind of goes back to the federal government, is that it was, I think, in the late 1990s that that lobbyists really became a fixture. They were, and that needs to stop. That needs to stop, because that's the problem. That's why we're turning, that's why everything is being privatized. That's why all the people are being disenfranchised. That's why there's an increase in things like homelessness, and children are not being educated properly, and doctors are afraid actually to say anything because they'll lose their licenses with regard to these globalist organizations. Sounding so strong.
Lobbying is never going to stop, and lobbying isn't necessarily a problem as long as councillors are also hearing a counterpoint. In fact, there's a valid point of view out there that lobbying is fine. Councillors should be exposed to all the opinions that are out there. It only becomes a problem when they're hearing a corporate voice at the expense of and the exclusion of the community voice. But organizations like yours, either at the individual neighborhood level or as a federation, you can counter that. And like I said before, at the end of the day, the councillors are most worried about is voters. They don't get elected by lobbyists. If they feel that voters are watching them and they have a strong opinion about a property or a development proposal or saving some trees or you name it, if they know that people understand the issue and are watching the issue, you have way more power than any lobbyist does.
Okay, do you mind if I just respond to this?
Oh,
I wonder
well,
if we could have, I'm just thinking
Yep.
we have about 5 minutes left, and if there's anyone who hasn't spoken who would like to ask a question or make a comment with Dave.
Alan Gummo.
Alan, Christine,
Oh,
Alan.
sorry, pardon me. Go ahead, Alan. Thank you.
Greetings from Brazil, everyone. I'm and hello, Dave. And I think what you said this evening is absolutely top notch. And I think probably like myself at a distance, you're starting to sense some frustration building up amongst the group, which is totally explainable. And I just like to put it out there that, and this would be, I guess, Dave, for your benefit, if you ever want to do a deep dive into anti-democratic local government, come on down to Kingston. We'll show you how they do it. And for the coalition, I just like to put it out there that some months back, I put out a proposal, which I thought was pretty modest at the time. Some of you are aware of it, having to do with reform of City Hall and what has to be done. And I'd be willing, I'm making this offer and the coalition can pick it up or not, when I'm back in Canada to sit down and let's have a bit of a talk about that, because I think there's some really big issues here that if we don't deal with them, then the good ideas that Dave has, frankly, are not going to go anywhere. And so I'm just going to make that offer, and somebody can send me an email, and you're kind of smiling. And when I'm back in Canada, we can get together to talk about it. Thank you.
When are you coming back?
March. I'm back in March.
Oh,
A very mysterious contribution, Alan.
Yeah, well, I did send it to you. I guess maybe you didn't open it and read it. Otherwise, you'd know what I'm talking about. Check your emails.
I read it, Alan, and I found it a bit overwhelming. It sounds like we have to become absolute experts. And as Dave said, we're up against experts and professionals. And it's really hard for citizens to get that knowledgeable.
Well, I think Dave did say that, and he's absolutely right. And it's sort of like Hunter Thompson, you know, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. We need at least to aspire to a higher level of expertise within the community. I'm not saying we have to be as expert as they are, but I think we have to up the game a bit. And it does mean moving in the direction of expertise rather than kind of shunning it.
Jamie, you have your hand up.
I would just second Alan's idea. I read his thing. It was very good. It's sort of a big picture take on what's wrong here. And there is a danger that people get caught up in the weeds of really important issues without stepping back and taking a wider look at what's going wrong and, more importantly, what can be done. And I think Dave's presentation offered us lots of food for thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Are there any more questions or comments from anyone who hasn't had a chance to say something yet would like to? Well, maybe people, thank you. We've had for 2 solid hours, almost everyone stayed till the bitter end, really, to talk about citizen engagement. I think this evening shows that it's alive and well in Kingston, that we, the people, want to be engaged. We're here, we're talking, we're thinking together. And thank you very much, Dave, for being such a great catalyst for a very valuable discussion. And thank you everyone for being here as well. And we'll have to talk about this some more among ourselves and reach out to each other and follow up on a lot of the suggestions that a lot of the conversations around the screen have pointed to. So thank you very much, everyone. And a big thank you again to Dave. Thanks so much for visiting Kingston virtually.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Good night. Thanks again.
Thank you, Christine, for pulling it all together.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night, all.